to be looking at what's an ideal society. You're going to imagine that all of Australia, or at least New South Wales, is already fully in Krishna consciousness. And then we're going to imagine that society as if it's already existing. Then we're going to um, see what we're doing in that society. And we're going to look back at today and figure out what we want to do today to get there. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. Man, it is so hot. Not as hot as Indonesia, actually. I mean, Indonesia was basically the second you weren't with AC, you were just dripping. Yeah. Dripping. Yeah, like you just get out from the AC and you're just sweat running down your back, and everybody's all the time saying, "Wow." Yeah, or even just like go out in your pocket. After I went to New Zealand, I'm in Wellington, and in Wellington it got up to 21 degrees, and 4 people said to me, "It's so hot." They're like, "Don't stay out too long in the heat." That's wild. I was once in I was once in Mayapur when it was hot, and I was taking 5 showers a day. Okay. Yeah, if I didn't stick my head under cold water, I felt like my brain was flying. Well, people did live there before there was AC, you know. Namo Om Shivaya Krishna Sadhya Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachana Namaste Susamarani Kastajadis. Well, welcome to our third really, in-depth lesson where we're going to be covering lesson 4, why fence off the fields. And there's 2 chapters in our book about this. What happens when you work in the wrong field? Huh? Is someone going to take a video? I don't know. You mean like from cameras here in the temple room? That one does not look like it's facing me at all. It's like, hello everybody out in live streaming land. It's one of the funny things about the modern age is you never really know who you're talking to. And then it's recorded and people watch it later. Yeah, one of my strangest experiences was the first time I ever came to Australia, and someone came up to me who I'd never met in my life and said, "I've been listening to your classes for years," and I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah. Uh-huh. I tend to be very focused on whoever my live audience is. And, all right. So today we're going to discuss one aspect of Principle 4. So this is just one aspect of doing ethical and meaningful work of value. In our overview, we'll discuss other aspects, but this is just one part of it that we'll be discussing today. And there's 2 chapters in our book on this. So if you want to read more in detail about what we're discussing today, this is in chapters 5 and 6. And then tomorrow, the same time, we'll be again summarizing the whole book. So we'll be looking at all 9 principles. Right? And just maybe we should take a super quick look again. So tomorrow we'll be discussing all 9 principles of career Dharma. And today we're looking at a part of Principle 4. And a number of people brought this point up yesterday, that everybody's work should be ethical and meaningful. All right. So if you'd like more information, if you'd like to be advised when we have our online course and our audio book, our workbook, you can sign up there. All those are in production and they're not going to come out in the next day or 2. So my co-author, Ruchira, aka Rukmini, and I feel that the topic we're going to cover today is the most wow of everything that we looked at. What happens when you do someone else's work? Because a lot of people may say, well, I know I'm not working according to my nature, but at least I'm getting some money, and maybe I'm doing something that's good. But that's not a fact. As soon as we're doing someone else's work, we're actually causing harm to ourselves, and we're causing harm to society. We actually cannot really do ethical work of value if we're doing someone else's work. So as I mentioned the other day, Krishna makes this point twice in the Bhagavad Gita. Don't do someone else's work, even if apparently you're very good at it. Does anyone remember the three kinds of expertise to have in any job? Dharma, the knowledge and the skills, yes. So to do any kind of work, you need some kind of knowledge, you need some kind of skills, but you also need the Dharma. So you might be expert in the knowledge and skills of someone else's work, but if it's not your Dharma, you're going to make a mess of things. So this is the first time that Krishna says it. This is 335. The second time he says it is 1847. And anything a teacher repeats must be important. You see, the first two lines are exactly the same. Shreya Swadharma, Swaya Swadharma Viguna Paradhamma Swanustitat. These two lines are the same in each verse. Don't go on someone else's path, even if their path seems easier, even if it seems better, even if it seems you can do it well. When we go on someone else's path, we are pretending to be someone we're not. That's exhausting, isn't it? You ever been to an event that you didn't really want to be at? And you're just like, I'm so glad I'm here. Lovely to see all of you, right? And it's stress on the system. And if we're spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day doing something that's not really an expression of ourself, then we're putting our whole system under stress. Krishna calls this bhayavaha. Your work becomes a vehicle of fear. What an interesting term, huh? Bhaya means fear, avaha means a vehicle. The work you're doing becomes a vehicle of fear. Now that's for both you as the driver and for anybody in your vicinity. It's something like if you try to drive a car in the water or an airplane in the sky, it's going to become a bhayavaha. So the first consideration is what doing someone else's work does to us personally. Now, of course, anything we do that harms ourselves personally does affect people around us. We can't do anything that only hurts ourselves. That's just not really possible. But here we're looking primarily at personal harm. So swadharma means our own work, and paradharma means someone else's work. So when we do our own work, we naturally go into a state that psychologists, sociologists call flow. And flow it's a sort of samadhi where you lose track of time, you're fully absorbed in what you're doing. You may forget to eat and sleep, you're just like, oh no, I missed lunch. And you regretfully go to sleep. Oh, I wish I could just keep doing this all the time. Your work actually energizes you. When we're doing our own work, what often happens, you're so energized by your work, you keep going, and then when you stop, you're like, oh my goodness, I have to get some sleep. It's giving you energy. When we're doing someone else's work, it's depleting us. We'll feel exhausted or frustrated, or we may do a lot of procrastinating. We feel like it's taking taking out of us. The time is dragging by. Now you can understand why this sort of thing doesn't just affect myself, right? If I'm feeling depleted, are other people around me going to be affected by that? Of course. The next is regarding the mind. So Krishna talks in the Bhagavad Gita that the yogis should make their mind their friend, not their enemy. When we're doing our own work, it's extremely easy to have your mind be your friend, because your own work is an extension of yourself. And when you're doing someone else's work, your mind will become your enemy. So you remember that in yesterday's session, we talked about for each of the 4 fields, the criticisms that people would have about each field. And I find that it's those sort of places that our mind goes when I do someone else's work. Like if you're not suited for ideas and you're working in ideas, your mind is probably saying something like, this is stupid, this is useless, this is a waste of time. Why am I doing this? If you're not suited for government work and you're doing work in the field of government, your mind may be saying, where are the leaders? Why aren't they doing this? Why do I have to be taking care of something that they should be taking care of? If you're not naturally suited for resources and you're doing work in resources, you might be thinking, what's wrong with me? Why do I have to be so money-minded? Why do I have to be so profit-minded? Why do I have to be so expansive? And if you're not really suited for artistry and you're doing artistry work, you may be thinking, does anybody care? Does anybody notice? Does this really matter to anybody? Or some variation of that. Do you follow? Yes? And when we're doing our own work, these thoughts never arise. When we're doing our own work, we don't think it's useless. We don't want to outsource it to anybody else. We don't feel degraded by it. And we're not looking so much for external recognition. And therefore, our mind is easily flowing with what we're doing. Now, another very interesting thing in the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's often telling us to do our own work. And he's also very often telling us to do detached work, to work without attachment to the result. Correct? Now, there's some people that have the mistaken idea that if you do work that you love, and that's an expression of yourself, that you'll be more attached. And that if you want to be detached, you should do work that you hate. Or you should be willing to do anything. You know, if you're actually detached, you're just willing to do anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So, first of all, this is a very strange conception in my mind. This is a very strange conception of God. That God would want people to do work that didn't fulfill them and that wasn't an expression of themselves. And I will say to people, you know, if you're planning on spending eternity with God, do you want to spend eternity with a God that wants you to spend most of your time being unhappy? No. Why is that attractive? The other thing is that Krishna is very clear that doing our own work and doing detached work are complementary. So, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of our movement, he made a statement once that if we do what's natural, if we desire what's natural, that is desirelessness. So there's many spiritualists who feel that desirelessness means not having any desires at all. But desirelessness means to desire to be what you are. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example, if someone says, I want to eat, you don't say, well, what's wrong with you? Why do you want to eat? Right? If we desire that which is natural, that's not a desire. And therefore, if we're doing work that's an ideal expression of ourself, we're naturally detached from the results. The work itself is satisfying us. We can offer the results to the divine, and whether they're externally good or externally not good, we're still going to feel satisfied. And therefore, we're not going to be bound by the results of our work or bound by the karma of our work. When I'm doing somebody else's work, exactly the opposite happens. I'm not satisfied by the work itself, and because we're naturally pleasure-seeking, the Sanskrit is anandamaya bhyasat, we naturally seek pleasure. So if I'm not getting pleasure from the work itself, I'm going to look for pleasure in the externals of it. I'm going to end up getting very attached to the externals, and I'm going to become bound by my work. And again, can you understand how all of these would affect not only ourselves but others? Right? If I'm frustrated and depleted, if my mind's acting as my enemy, or if I'm very attached to the results, am I going to be a pleasant person to be around? You know, and imagine, or maybe we don't have to imagine, if you're in some environment where there's a lot of people in a situation like that. You know, if you're in some kind of work environment where a lot of people are in the wrong place, it's not going to be very pleasant for anyone. So this is not just an internal experience. Just like, you know, we've all had the experience, we walk into a room where an argument has just taken place, and we just kind of, right? Or we walk into a room where someone's planning a pleasant surprise for us. You know, we can pick up that there's something going on. Okay, even though that does affect others, we're now going to look at the effects on society at large when somebody with the temperament for one field does work in the other field. And in the book, we go into this in far more depth with many specific historical examples. So I'm not going to go as in depth as we do in the book, but I think it should give you a pretty good idea. Okay, the first is crossing government and resources. Does anyone remember what's similar about the field of government and the field of resources? They're both expansive fields. Yes. Anything else similar? They're both diplomatic fields. Yes. And what's different about these two fields? Yeah? Government's about what? Leading. Yes. And government's also about more distribution, fair, equitable distribution of resources and justice. You know, distribution of resources for the sake of justice, whereas resources itself is just about generating those resources and getting them out to society. And then it's the job of government to make sure that there's a fair and equitable distribution of them. Do you see kind of the difference in what's happening? All right. So let's say that you have people with the mentality of resources working in government. Well, resource people can be systems thinkers, but they're focusing on their particular area of resources. They're not really wired to see the whole system of all the people and all the people's needs. They have more of a laser-like focus on their particular enterprise. It's very difficult for them to think of the welfare of society in general. People with the mentality of resources working in government, they may tend to want to profit off of government because making a profit is part of their Dharma. It's how they keep resources sustainable and regenerative for the world. But that's not the Dharma of the field of government, and if they bring that in, it makes a corruption in government. One example of this is that in the United States, we have some privately run prisons. So are the people who make a business out of prisons, are they going to be thinking of the welfare of the prisoners? Are they going to want to put money into education and reform of the prisoners? Are they going to try to help the prisoners re-enter society, or do they want repeat customers? But see, the values of resources and the values of government are different. So somebody who has the natural values of resources is not really going to be able to pretend on a long-term basis to have the values of government, even if they work in the field of government. Because Krishna says that our nature cannot be repressed. So the values, the Dharma of resources, is to have this expansive wealth for society and to make a profit. Without a profit, the wealth cannot be sustainable and regenerative. They have to save seeds from the harvest to replant. Their values are about supporting their employees, supporting their customers, giving wealth for society. That's their intrinsic values. And so when you stick them in a government role that doesn't have, that with those values don't fit, And you could say, well, then they should just adjust. But they can't, because Krishna says our nature cannot be repressed. Does that make sense? It will come out anyway. And what works wonderfully for somebody who's growing wheat for the society is not going to work well when you're running a prison for society. Now let's look at the opposite. Let's look at people with the mentality of government working in resources. They're going to prioritize care of people as more important than the project or the profits. Now, at first, that sounds very nice. Wow, they're going to prioritize people over projects. But the project itself has to be sustainable and regenerative in order to serve both the people that it employs and the people that it's serving. So if they're prioritizing what the needs of the people are, their profits tend to go down. People with the mentality of government working in resources, they're concerned with honor, justice, and fairness for which they're willing to give their lives. But they're not trying to increase the prosperity of society. I would like you to think about, and when I talk to Russians, they all go, yeah, what happened in the former Soviet Union when the government took over the farms and the businesses? There was starvation. The crops were literally rotting in the fields. Because people with a government mentality, they weren't able to have this sustainable, regenerative mood of feeding the society. They just weren't able to motivate themselves like that. They're motivated by something different. Government-minded people working in resources, they're going to think, well, what's a fair price? Okay, well, a fair price is that which is going to promote social justice in society. And they'll bankrupt the business. There's a number of businesses that are run particularly with this in mind, about social justice, and they tend not to do well. And if they start doing very well, the government-minded people who run them become disinterested in them and usually sell them to a resources person. So either they can't sustain the work and they give it to someone in resources, or they tend to bankrupt the work. Crossing government and ideas. So what's some similarity between government and ideas? They tend to be the leaders of society in different ways, yes? And they tend to look at big systems. Although government looks at big systems to control it, and ideas looks at big systems to understand it and be able to give guidance and be able to give wisdom. What's very different also about these fields? Yeah? No, they're both looking at the whole. Oh, some people and ideas are just looking at some minutia, but not generally. Yeah. It's a different kind of responsibility. Yeah. Excellent. The ideas is a more abstract field. Ideas is the most abstract field. Government is the second most abstract, and that's a huge difference. What's another difference? It's the most honest field. It's a field of absolute straightforwardness, and government is a field of diplomacy. Yeah. Also, government is an expansive field. It's a field where, you want to protect more and more people. Ideas is a field where people feel very satisfied. Okay, if you have the people with the mentality of ideas working in government, so you might remember that people with the dharmic expertise in ideas we mentioned yesterday, they have a quality of mercy. That's a wonderful quality, but not if you're trying to punish heinous criminals. So ideas people working in government tend to excuse evildoers. Yeah, we have a problem with this in society in general. We definitely have a problem with this in our Hare Krishna movement. People with the mentality of ideas working in government. So government has to enthuse people with some patriotism. Otherwise, how are you going to pay your taxes? How are you going to sign up for military service? How are you going to do your civic responsibility? There has to be a little bit of Rah, 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 our group is great. And ideas people think that that's really stupid. They're just too detached. And they're going to be like, our group, your group, what is all this group thing? And they won't be able to encourage people to actually contribute. People with the mentality of ideas doing work in the field of government. So ideas people often like to research and research some more and then research a little bit more. In government, you often have to make decisions without all the information in a more expedient manner in order to meet people's immediate needs. And ideas people will have a difficult time doing this. They'll feel very conflicted about it. This is also another problem we have in our Hare Krishna movement. That some decisions that should be made in 6 months, we're researching for 20 years and then another 30 years and then let's write another paper on it, let's get another committee, and so forth and so on. And meanwhile, people's needs are not being met. People with the mentality of government working in ideas, they will tend to politicize knowledge. Now, any of the other 3 fields working in ideas are going to skew knowledge in some way. Government-minded people will politicize knowledge. Resources-minded people will profitize, if there's such a word, knowledge. People in the field of artistry will sensualize knowledge. In any of these cases, people in general will lose faith in the objectivity of the field of ideas, which is a huge harm to society because ideas is providing the vision for society. If you can't trust what the scientists are saying or the religionists are saying or the philosophers are saying, there's going to be havoc in society. Does that make sense to everybody? It's just like if you have people with the mentality of government writing the history books. Can you trust that that's objective knowledge? Government-minded people working in ideas. So government-minded people are often comfortable with a more hierarchical system than people in ideas. And this particular type of flow in ideas is not generally understood by people in the other fields. For example, when I got my PhD, I went to the professor who'd been the advisor on my thesis, my dissertation committee. He was also the head of the whole College of Education in the university, and he had been my academic advisor, and I'd had him as a professor in 2 or 3 courses. So his name was Dr. Fenwick English, and I went up to him and I said, Dr. English, thank you so much for all your help. And he said, no. He said, now that you have a PhD, you're one of us, and I'm not Dr. English anymore, I'm Fenwick. And, whoo! Ouch. That whole chair just broke. Okay, we got some people on Rambaru and some people on the chair. Are you okay, Rambaru? No, well, sorry to interrupt me. Oh my God. I'm so sorry you got a defective chair. Are you hurt? Just a little shocked. Okay. Ouch. That doesn't sound like fun. Make sure you all check the chairs before you sit in them. So I found that this particular mentality of the field of ideas, I've been to some seminars where the norms of the seminars will be no one should borrow power from their position. There's no hierarchy in the seminar. And that's a particular standard of the field of ideas. But those in the field of government, those naturally suited to the field of government, are often going to feel more comfortable with something that's more hierarchical. If you think about the whole mood of the military. Oh, there we have one now. These legs aren't going to break on you. Yeah, I'll tell you. Now you got PTSD about chairs. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in 2010, I slipped on some wet stairs and broke my foot. And I noticed after that, I became much more careful going up and down stairs. Like, why am I walking down? Oh, yeah, that's why I'm walking like that. So anyway, government-minded people will tend to impose more of a hierarchy on ideas, which kind of stops up the free flow of knowledge. Government-minded people and ideas, here we have the opposite problem. So they're the rah-rah our team group, and they're working in a field of detachment. And they may impose the rah-rah our team group on the field of ideas. They may impose sectarian views or political views on what's supposed to be a very detached, egalitarian field. Crossing ideas and resources. Anyone have any remembrance of what's similar about these two fields? They're both kind of unsentimental fields. What's, yes? What? Knowledge is wealth. Oh, that's interesting. Now let's see where we can take that as we go through this. What's different about these two fields? Yes? They're much more results than process oriented, yes. And you also have this expansive, satisfied dichotomy and this diplomatic, honest dichotomy. Yes? But both of these are unsentimental fields. Now, what really fascinates me about this particular crossing is the extreme difference in one's view of what is ethical. So when somebody with the mentality of ideas, works, and resources, they may feel that they're doing something very unethical by making money and making a profit, which is the whole work of that field. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But an ideas person may feel that that's intrinsically unethical. And I will hear that when I teach this, that somebody will just think the field of resources is intrinsically corrupt, which is interesting because then we'd be saying that producing wheat and rice and cotton is intrinsically a corrupt thing to do, right? But an ideas person working in that field will feel like that. They'll just feel like, why am I involved in money? An ideas person in resources, because they don't have this expansive view. I mean, they might make a little backyard garden, but they're not going to make an agribusiness. They're just not going to be into feeding the world. I have a good friend who started a business because she's like, I have to make money, and the only way you make money is with a business, right? There's no other way to make money. She said, but I hate making money. She said, I hate running a business. I said, what would you rather do? She said, I'd like to take everything in my shop and just give it all away. And that's the mentality of ideas. Let's just give it away. And again, the business fails. People with the mentality of resources and ideas, they may profitize knowledge. Think about pharmaceutical companies who then do research into pharmaceuticals. Can you trust that? No. And again, it diminishes faith in the field of ideas. Is that a big problem right now? That people think, I can't trust what the scientists say. I can't trust what the philosophers say. I can't trust what the religionists say. Now, in America, we call foolish things pies in the skies. Do you say that? Do you say that's a pie in the sky? Srila Prabhupada would say it's a horse's egg. So you remember people outside the field of ideas tend to think that ideas work, a lot of the ideas work is useless. So people with the mentality of resources are going to look at the theoretical work that has to go on in the field of ideas as unethical. Are you with me? They're going to say it's unethical to spend people's time and money and facility on something that's not making money and helping people practically. That's unethical. So ideas people are going to think it's unethical to make money and make a profit. And resources people are going to think it's unethical to do theoretical research and theoretical study that doesn't have immediate, practical, measurable financial results. Can you see those two different systems of ethics? Because that makes sense in the field of resources. If I've got to have some business enterprise that's going to pay my employees and that's going to provide necessary resources for my customers, then I better make sure that everything I'm doing has some practical, financially beneficial result. That is my ethics in the field of resources. So people with the mentality of resources working in ideas may neglect whole portions of that field. Okay, crossing ideas and artistry. So what's similar about ideas and artistry? Yeah. Not really. Yes? Not really. It's artistry and government that serves people directly. Yes? Honesty. They're both fields of honesty and also satisfaction. But the nature of the honesty and satisfaction in these two fields is extremely different. So in artistry, you're satisfied if you're able to do your craft, your goods or services with a high level of integrity and beauty, if people are giving you fair compensation for your work, treating you with dignity, if you're able to satisfy a customer or a client, and if your basic needs in the world are nicely taken care of. Because it's a field of satisfaction, these people they don't really want a big mansion and all that kind of thing. But if they have a comfortable home and nice food to eat and nice clothes to wear and loving people around them, and they're treated with dignity and they can please people, they're satisfied. In ideas, people are not concerned about those things practically at all. They're concerned about having a very active internal, mental, and intellectual life. And then they're satisfied. And they're both fields of honesty, but artistry is going to be honest about, this is how much I spent for the pipe, and that's what I'm going to charge you. And I'm going to charge you separately for my labor. And I'm going to tell you what pipe does what kind of job. I'm not going to be advertising something to get you to buy something that you didn't want. And ideas is going to be honest in terms of straightforward truth, which may or may not please customers and clients. May please you in the long run. You know, the doctor's trying to please you in the long run, but you might not be pleased immediately if the doctor says, hey, you got to quit smoking and lose weight. That might not be something you really wanted to hear, although it's working to please you in the long run. Okay, people with the mentality of artistry working in ideas. So artistry is the most concrete field. You know, what is a chair, right? What is a chair? It's either it works or it doesn't work. It's very concrete. Ideas is the most abstract. What's a good philosophy is a lot more difficult to ascertain. Correct? Like, I can tell you whether or not it's a good chair. You sit on it, it breaks. It's a bad chair. Philosophy is it's the most abstract. So people with the mentality of artistry are going to struggle with the abstractions of ideas. This is something I run into a lot. Because in ideas you have to say, well, there's this quote in the scripture over here, then there's an apparent contradictory quote over here, another apparent contradictory quote over here, and then there's this in this context, and this in this context, and this in this context. And people with the mentality of artistry will say, can you just give me the answer? You know, this is something I run into all the time. They'll say, well, there really isn't an answer. And so because of that, if they're trying to do ideas work, they may lose the nuances. People with the mentality of artistry work in ideas may sensualize knowledge. So artistry provides all the pleasures of society. As I said, metaphorically, it's like they're providing all the salt and spices in the food of life. And ideas is providing the vision of society. So artistry-minded people working in ideas, it's like putting salt and spices in the eyes of society. Artistry people working in ideas may have a hard time taking the work of ideas seriously. You know, they may think, well, this is just silly. This is like a crossword puzzle that I'm going to do for recreation. You know, why do we have to do this kind of work? It may also be very difficult because artistry-minded people want to please a customer or a client. And in ideas, you have to be able to give detached, objective truth, whether it pleases customers or clients or not. You know, sorry, the results of our analysis show that your drug doesn't work. You know, this is going to be very difficult for people who are naturally in artistry. Artistry people are also very subject to being corrupted if they work in the field of ideas, because people in the field of ideas are not particularly interested in creature comforts or in pleasing others, but artistry people are. And so if someone comes up to them and says, hey, you know, could you just not report on that particular data? I mean, I'll give you a nice place and you'll be my friend. And they're like, okay. Artistry-minded people and ideas may have difficulty with the extreme freedom in the field of ideas. It's a more concrete field. Ideas people working in artistry may have a really difficult time trying to please customers or clients. And they're often terrible subordinates. Well, they'll be insubordinate, or they'll be late, they'll miss deadlines. Ideas-minded people in artistry may find it very difficult to work without a lot of freedom. And they may feel that they're just hampered and they can't really function, they can't really breathe. Ideas-minded people in artistry may be too detached from sensory pleasures to create beauty and pleasure in the world, and they may dry up the field of artistry. You know, and I've also seen this problem in our Hare Krishna movement. Nobody should have any kind of pleasure. Now, an opposite thing can also happen, that ideas people can get drawn into the sensual nature of the field of artistry. And this is particularly a problem for those in ideas who are intellectuals. Now, you remember that not everybody in ideas is an intellectual, right? Everybody remembers that? If it's raining, there has to be clouds, but if there's clouds, it may not be raining. So if you're an intellectual, you're probably in ideas, but if you're in ideas, you may not be an intellectual. A large number of the careers in ideas are not intellectual careers. But if you're an intellectual in the field of ideas and you work in artistry, you might just dry up the field, because you're just going to think that the purpose of providing sensual enjoyment. I had someone in one of my classes say that, you know, isn't that all just sense gratification? Do you want to eat just plain rice? Do you want to wear burlap? You know? Do you want gardens, or do you want just weeds everywhere? Huh? But if intellectuals in ideas get pulled into the sensual nature of artistry, you have a very dangerous situation. You have, for example, like food scientists who are using their intellectual abilities to figure out what combination of salt, sugar, fat, and crunch will cause you to keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eating. And then they artificially manufacture foods like that are not good for your health. Or think about people who study psychology and then make all these advertisements, you know, to get you to buy things you don't need or even that are bad for you by manipulating your psychology. So this is one of the harms that happens when the intellectuals of the field of ideas get into artistry. All right, crossing government and artistry. So what's similar about these fields? Yes? I'm sorry, what did you say? They want to provide service for society, yes. They're serving people directly. What's different in how they serve people? What's different in their mood of serving people? Yes? Assistant. Yeah, in Sanskrit terms, you can think that one is like Dasi and one is Vatsalya. It's quite different if you're serving as an assistant or you're serving as a parent. And then government is an expansive field, artistry is a satisfied field, government is a diplomatic field. artistry is a field of honesty. And government is the second most abstract field, and artistry is the most concrete field. So artistry-minded people in government, there's something called the fog of war, where you can map out your strategy for a battle, but when everything actually hits the ground, you have to make instant decisions without knowing what's going on. That's very different for concrete artistry people to do. Like, what do I do? What's the rule? What do I follow? Artistry-minded people in government, they don't have that expansive mood, and they may think, well, this is all politics. Why do I want to do this? You know, why do I want to take all this care for so many people? Let me have a simple life. Artistry-minded people in government may also impose a bureaucracy on government. Now, you want some bureaucrats as assistants in government, but you don't want government itself to be bureaucratic. You want government itself to work on principles applied individually. Now, remember we talked about how the epitome of the person in government is the firefighter? We talked about Arjuna's son Abhimanyu, meaning to go toward danger. So government is the only field where people run into the fire. Everybody else runs out. Now, artistry people, they're providing the status quo of society. This is the people that provide all the foundation of society. These aren't the running into a fire people. We had an incident in the last couple years in America where there was a shooting in a school, and 2 of the police officers never went in the school. And when they asked them why, they said, well, people were shooting. Okay, government-minded people in artistry. So government-minded people, again, they're energized by crisis. Do you want them putting in your electrical wiring? And here you have the same problem with ideas people in artistry. Government-minded people in artistry tend to be insubordinate. Again, they have more of a parental mood. They may be insubordinate, they may procrastinate, they may miss deadlines. Government-minded people in artistry are extremely frustrated. These are the people that want to provide justice, morals, ethics, fairness. And they're now working in a field that's very concrete, where they're having to please customers, and their ability to provide that justice and fairness in society is the most constrained. And so they often become like vigilantes or agitators. My personal conviction is that a lot of the people today in society who cause problems on social media or problems in society, always yelling and screaming for justice and morals and ethics, are people who belong in the field of government but aren't working there. And especially if they're working in artistry. They feel like they're just handicapped and they can't do what they're meant to do, and it comes out in this really bad way. And I mean, I can think of specific individuals I know like that. And one of them I've said, would you please get at least a part-time job working in the government? She's a trained mediator, and I'm like, at least 3 times a week, you know, even if it's volunteer, go and work as a mediator, work for justice. You know, everything she posts on social media is about this person's doing this thing wrong, and this person's doing this thing wrong, and why isn't this taken care of, and why? Go on and do something about it. Okay, crossing resources and artistry. So what is similar here? Yes. Yes. Yes, they're both fields that are very practical. Both working with the practical side of life. And what is different? One is expansive and one is satisfied, one is diplomatic, one is honest. Okay, resources people working in artistry. I personally think this is one of the saddest things that's happened in our modern world. I just think of all the crossings, this is one of the saddest. The whole industrialization of society was a result of resources people going into artistry. Saying, oh, let's expand and profitize textiles. Let's expand and profitize furniture making. Let's take all the arts and the skills and let's do them in a way that's going to make more money and do it more efficiently and get them out to more people, which is the Dharma of the field of resources. But you're not supposed to do that with pottery. You're not supposed to do that with spinning and weaving. You're not supposed to do that with the crafts. You're not supposed to do that with the service industries. And so things that are supposed to be done properly with crafts are being done in a factory. So yeah, you make more money, and yeah, more people get the stuff, but what they get is no good. And then the people who really want to be devoted to the integrity and quality of the craft find it almost impossible to compete. You know, we're losing the quality of almost everything in our modern society because resources people have gone into artistry. And I see this as a really severe problem. I was at one place somewhere in the world where somebody was building a retreat center in a community, and they were showing me with great pride how they were mixing concrete with fiberglass and pouring it into molds to make things look like carved stone. And they were engaging people who are naturally in the field of artistry with doing this work instead of engaging people with carving the stone. And they were like showing it off to me. And I said, this is horrible. And they were so, we're having that ecological center here and this and that. And I said, look, Varnashram isn't just about cows, because they had cows. And they had planted all native plants. They were really proud of that, how they had grown native plants from seed, and they had all native plants. And I said, you're not taking care of the people in the field of artistry, and you're not taking care of the field of artistry. I said, you're polluting the field. And these people are having to work with toxic chemicals, and they're not getting to do anything that's an expression of their craft. And he said, well, stone carving would take a long time. I'm like, yes. And so? Right? So this was a resource person. Think of what's happened in entertainment. You know, the field of artistry is primarily responsible for entertainment. Books, theater, movies, music. It's supposed to be emotionally satisfying, but it's also supposed to be inspiring and uplifting. I'm sure we've all been to musical performances and dramas that have been enriching and uplifting, correct? But resources people go in there and they're like, how can we make more money? Let's throw a bunch of sex and violence in there. Instead of just doing, athletics for the joy, they're going to have drug-fueled sports. Instead of beautifully created textiles, they're going to have fashions that go out of fashion every 2 months. So this taking over of the field of artistry by the field of resources has been a great harm. And it's something that Srila Prabhupada talked about a lot. He talked about bringing back the old crafts, bringing back the dignity of this field. Also, sometimes you find resources people get a hold of someone in artistry and try to push them to be expansive and profit-minded. Some athlete or some musician, and that it usually damages that person. Isn't it? It's not their natural sphere. Artistry-minded people in the field of resources. They don't have the expansive mood. You know, they might have a little bakery where they sell the stuff that they bake, but they're not going to want to make a chain of stores. They're not trying to feed the world. They're just trying to make the world more beautiful and more pleasurable. And therefore, they won't really be able to take that on. They're not going to have this mood of sustainable, regenerative wealth. And after we wrote the book, I was reading this thing that just jumped at me, how it was a series of praises for, like, cashiers and tellers who, in order to please the customers, gave them goods for free or at a huge discount. And how wonderful these people were and how they touched people's hearts. And I thought, yeah, but they're bankrupting their business. And they're stealing from their business. And that it's just a matter of time before the business doesn't serve anybody. But again, they're not trying for sustainable regenerative wealth. They're looking for beauty and pleasure and pleasing a client or customer. Now, in order for that to work in artistry, people have to also give people in the field of artistry a fair and dignified amount of money for their goods or services and treat them with respect. Yes, do you understand? It's a symbiotic relationship. Artistry-minded people in resources also may not end up caring for the environment because they don't have the sustainable, regenerative view. So we've looked at here how everybody is beautiful in their own place. As soon as you take somebody out of their place, they're going to cause havoc for themselves individually, and they're going to cause havoc for society. So we have quite a lot of time now. Yesterday we did 2 lessons together, so we didn't have a whole lot of time. But today we have more time. Tomorrow we're going to do a summary of the whole book. But I wonder if anyone has any general discussion or question on anything we talked about with prosperity types or the fields. Yes. Uh-huh. Can anyone answer her question? Where would nonprofits go? Yeah? Generally in government. Now, it depends what you're trying to do. So if you have nonprofits that do the work that a government normally does, you know, in ancient times, people working in the field of government were allowed to get money from taxes and fees or from rent, but not from charity. But in our modern day and age, governments often have gaps in service that are filled by charitable organizations that are ironically often called non-governmental organizations. And they're specifically called non-government organizations because they do the work of government without being a government. So if you are in a nonprofit that's providing government-type services, you're building roads, you're digging wells, you know, you're providing for clean water, providing for clean food, you're providing for justice, you know, shelters for battered spouses, or places for endangered animals, things of this, the kind of thing the government is supposed to be doing, that's in the field of government. Now, you could have a nonprofit that does something completely different. You could have a nonprofit that's working specifically just for education. That would be in the field of ideas. Yes?
How can you tell the difference between someone who's acting adharmically or is just in the wrong field?
How do I tell the difference between someone who's acting adharmically and is in the wrong field?
Or is just in the wrong field?
You look at what their basic values are. So if someone's basic values are protection and morals and ethics and justice, but they're not acting dharmically in that way. They want to take care of people. You know, they want to have some kind of control of people and organizing people. I mean, the extreme example of an adharmic government would be the mafia. You know, we had someone give an example of drug dealers as adharmic resources. So, you know, if you're a drug dealer, you're displaying the tendencies of... Oh my God, Krishna, I don't think anyone should sit in any of these plastic chairs. Anyone who's sitting in a plastic chair, please get out of the plastic chair and sit somewhere else. Plastic chairs have been fixed. Yes, 2 in a row. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm going to be on the floor. All right, please get out of the plastic chairs. They're all set to explode on the same day. All right. Woo! I don't know. Just get off the plastic chairs, please. Ah! Goodbye. Anyway, I'm more comfortable on the floor. I'm actually more comfortable on the floor. I'm really happy. I'm very, very, very comfortable on the floor. Yeah, well, those chairs especially. I don't know. Maybe they were all manufactured on the same date and all set to explode on the same date. So those 2 examples I gave are people working in a field but criminally. You know, they have the inclination for the field, but they're doing it in a criminal manner. No, I'm actually more comfortable on the floor. But thank you for asking. I was finding that chair quite uncomfortable. I kept trying to find a way to sit on it that was comfortable, and it wasn't. None of my attempts were working. Yes. Everyone only fits into one field because they're mutually exclusive. The dharmas are in opposition to each other. They're complementary when the fields work together. Now, you can be in one field particularly assisting another field. Like, let's say you're the minister of labor in the government, or the secretary of labor, whatever you call it here. You're in government assisting artistry. Or let's say that you're an administrative assistant in a law firm, you're in artistry assisting government. So if we have some interest in more than one field, it's generally a situation like that, where you're in one field, but you particularly like to assist another field. Am I making some sense? Yeah? You could be, if you're a law professor, you're in ideas, especially assisting government. Yes, back there. Do we have another mic also?
Thank you. Firstly, would these poor quality chairs be an example of resource-minded people being in artistry?
Yes, exactly.
Mass production.
Yes, mass production, poor quality. We had a good, I suppose, object lesson, yes.
Yes. I do have an actual question, though. I might have missed this in the beginning of the class, but you mentioned that everyone only belongs in one field. They
Correct.
can only belong in one field because they are mutually exclusive. But how do we utilize the prosperity types in conjunction with the field that you're in?
Excellent.
To gauge our level of fulfillment within the field?
Excellent question. So each field tends to produce a certain prosperity type for society.
Okay.
But you can get any prosperity type in any field. So certain prosperity types more naturally fit into some fields than others, but you can get any in any field. I gave the example the other day of someone who's a leader in artistry. He's a project leader. Do you remember that example I gave? That he when there's a business that's starting a new business in a new location or renovating, they'll call in this guy, and he has a team of carpenters and a team of plumbers and a team of furniture people and a team of interior decorators, and he brings them all together to do what the customer wants. So that's Aishwarya in artistry.
And so if you have your 6 prosperity types prioritized,
Yes.
is it still possible for them all to be of value to you? It's just obviously ranked in a
Well,
different degree.
it's very rare to find any kind of work that's going to give you all 6.
Right.
In our Appendix A, there's one of those people who gets 5. You know, if you go through the exercise in Appendix A and we list different jobs and describe them, what prosperity type are they getting from their work? Most people are getting 2 or 3, maybe 4, but there's one of them that gets 5. And we mentioned that that particular job is in very high demand, and that once people get that job, they practically never quit. They usually stay there until they die. So it's very difficult, and there's a limited number of positions in that work, so it's a very hard job to get. Yeah? But what you want to look for, therefore, is your top 2 or 3. You should be able to get some, because the top 2 are usually going to be something that without them, you're going to feel impoverished. No matter how much money you're making, you're going to spend all your time at work feeling impoverished. Actually, I was just on the phone today. Some of you may know Jai Shri from Sydney. She contributed one of the testimonials for the book, and you should have gotten your free copy of the book too, didn't you? Yes. So Rambaru also contributed one of the testimonials to the book. Anyway, Jai Shri was reading through the book, and she said, I really like your chapter 2 where you talk about the prosperity types. She said people think it's all about money, but it's not. So in any field, your prosperity types gives you more specificity of work. Where you can say, what specific kind of work do I want to do in this field? And you look for at least your top 2, maybe 3. And for many of us, there may be even be 1 or 2 types of prosperity we really don't want to get from our work. We might want to have it, but we might not want to have it in our work.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Is that all right?
Yes.
You gave an example about the people in resources with the chairs, how the chairs are breaking, and how they're infringing upon the people in artistry. But isn't that their position, to make things more cheap and affordable and kind of expand resources? Like, isn't that their position?
That's their dharma for the raw materials. Not what the artisans do with the raw materials, but for the raw materials. And even then, their dharma is to have sustainable and regenerative wealth with the raw materials. So to make sure that they're cherishing the land and make sure they're cherishing the animals. So even then, they're not to push the land or the animals beyond their capacity. But no, they're not supposed to be messing with the crafts. They're going to provide the wool, they're going to provide the flax, they're going to provide the cotton widely. But then it's the people in artistry who are going to make the clothes out of it, and the curtains, and the upholstered chairs, and things like that. And that's not resources people. That's not an expansion of wealth, that's an expansion of beauty and an expansion of pleasures. It may be subtle, but it's very real. It's a very real distinction. You know, your artistry people are not, they're not profit-minded generally. And they're not like, I gotta do bigger, bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not their thing. Unless they're pushed by somebody. Yes. I think sometimes it might be a little subtle. But again, you're looking at the basic value. Am I providing wealth for everyone, or am I providing beauty, functionality, and pleasures? What am I providing? Like you want to mine the metals, but then what's done with the metals? Making spoons, making plates, making bells, making doors. That's about pleasure and beauty. Now you want to make sure you mine enough metals so that enough people can have doors and bells and belt buckles. But when it comes to the other, then that's in artistry. Now, you can have a resource person running a business that employs people in artistry, but if so, the resource person has to respect the Dharma of artistry and not impose the Dharma of resources on the Dharma of artistry. And you have some people that do that. You have some resource people who facilitate artisans. I mean, I know of some personally. Does that help at all? I haven't thought about that enough to answer that with absolute, can I get some more water? With absolute specificity. But I could say that it's about the basic values that's driving it. And if you're going to take something that's about beauty and function and pleasure, then resources people can facilitate that, but they shouldn't themselves try to be doing it. I mean, it is a fine line, because resources people employ people in the field of artistry. Let's look at, let's say you have a construction company. So the people in the field of artistry that are doing the construction, it's their dharma to stand for the integrity and quality of the work that they're doing. And then it's the dharma of the resources people to respect that. That's a cooperation between the fields. And the resources people say, we're going to respect that, and we're not going to push you for profit and expediency in such a way that you're going to sacrifice the quality and integrity of what you're doing. That's obviously not what's happening in modern society generally, but that's what's supposed to happen. And then you can have also resources people, they're providing the raw materials, but then the people in artistry may be making the bricks. You know, if you had a little bit more simple, less industrialized society, I think the line would be easier to see, because resources people wouldn't be involved at that level at all. He's asking how beautiful a spoon is supposed to be. If you're in artistry, it's supposed to be quite beautiful and is providing pleasure. Beauty, pleasure, functionality. Functionality without beauty is not the interest of the field of artistry. And pleasure. I mean, it could be on a simple level. You know, somebody picking up the garbage is making the world more beautiful. You might not think of it that way. You might not think that someone's picking up the garbage is the same as somebody painting beautiful oil paintings, but it is the same. They're making the world more beautiful.
Can I rephrase my question?
Yeah, sure.
I guess where I struggle to understand, and I asking you to help me to understand. beauty is a very subjective, um, subjective thing. How would
Well, yes and no. There's a lot of scientific research that infants have a universal sense of beauty. So, yes and no. Like different cultures have somewhat different ideas of what's beautiful. There's different art forms, like there's some Indian art forms, for example, that I don't like at all. Like, oh, this is some traditional art form of this state of India, and I'm like, I don't like it. So there is such a thing as personal taste. But concepts of beauty and symmetry, there are some basic universal standards of that. But because there is individual taste, you can probably buy 1,000 different styles of spoons. And that's also part of the Dharma of the field of artistry. And now resources might say, well, why do we need 1,000 different styles of spoons? A spoon is a spoon is a spoon. Just, stamp them out and make money. And people in the field of artistry are going to say, no, a spoon isn't a spoon is a spoon. You're going to like this one, and you're going to like this one, and you're going to like this one. And you know how many, seriously, like if someone's going to get married, and I don't know if they still do this, and, you buy them like silverware as a wedding present. You've got maybe thousands of styles to choose from. Does it have a little curly Q like this, or a little curly Q like that, or, And we might think, well, that's completely silly. But it's not completely silly. When I was recently in Bali, and Bali is a place still where the field of artistry in many ways is very highly respected and is very connected with spirituality. Now, it's not what it should be and what it could be and what it was. I told them there, I said, the culture's not dead, but it's sick. I said, but at least it's not dead. I said, and a lot of the rest of the world is just dead. So you have everywhere, buildings, gates, everything, everywhere is beautiful. It's just astonishing. And most of the beauty is connected with some sort of spiritual tradition. That's the way society used to be. It used to be your clothing, your utensils, your jewelry, your buildings, your gardens, everything. And Srila Prabhupada writes about this. There's one place where he writes about it that you read it and you really, at least, you're kind of scratching your head. That Prabhupada's talking about this kind of natural opulence in society as spiritual. And you're like, what does he mean that it's spiritual? He's talking about, textiles with natural fibers and decorations with flowers. They used to decorate with pearls. Pearls. Nowadays, if you want it, like if we were to put some decorations up, it would probably be paper or plastic flowers. I mean, even today in India, if you see flower decorations, they're usually real flowers. And you'll see this in India. You'll see that it's a festival, and the whole temple, the ceiling, the walls, the doors are full of flower-made decorations. And I'm thinking, my God, to do this in America, you'd have to be fabulously rich. And you would only do this maybe once in a lifetime at a wedding or something. In India, they're doing it for every festival. It used to be like this with pearls. The Japanese introduced cultured pearls. You know what cultured pearls are, right? You get a bunch of oysters, you put them in a cage, and you stick a piece of plastic in them. And then they cover it with nacre, and you harvest it with this thin nacre. That's cultured pearls. And natural pearls is you leave the oysters in their own environment, and you look and see if any of them has a natural pearl. Bahrain is one of the few, it may be only places in the world where cultured pearls are illegal. and they still have only natural pearls. But one necklace of all-round matching natural pearls in Bahrain is $500,000 US. I can't imagine what kind of society would have ropes of natural pearls as decorations in a building for a festival. So that's what the world used to be like. I mean, another thing that really strikes me in this regard, I'm kind of incense person. So in my own place, I have all natural incense. I have, real frankincense resin and real myrrh and dragon's blood and copal and things like that. But a lot of that's becoming very difficult to get. I get real aguru oil, but, a little bottle of real aguru oil is like $300. And what's happened is that, again, people in the field of artistry have been pushed out by people in the field of resources, and they're taking the agarwood trees, and instead of waiting 20 or 30 years until the fungus naturally grows and they can harvest the aguru little by little without harming the tree, they artificially inject young trees with this fungus, and after 2 years they harvest it, and pretty soon all the original aguru is going to be gone. Give it 50 years, you won't be able to buy natural aguru or natural frankincense anymore. It'll be completely gone. Practically the only real sandalwood in the world comes from Australia. I don't know if you guys knew that. A lot of the sandalwood you buy in India is garbage. So this is what's happening in the field of artistry, because resource people are going into it. And I think because of that situation in the world, it's coming up with this kind of demarcation line is becoming blurred. Now the resource people might, you might be someone in artistry who takes your stuff to someone in resources and they pay you for it and they distribute it in a big way. But if they're doing the Dharma, they're not going to mess with the integrity and quality of what you're doing. So you might have someone, who has all these aguru harvesters going out, and they're collecting the natural aguru oil, and they're bringing it to somebody in resources, and that resource person is doing advertising, and that resource person is doing marketing, and they're getting a broad base, and they're distributing it. And I know one company that does this, but they really make sure they preserve the integrity of the field of artistry. That's their selling point. We're not over-harvesting. We're not artificially producing this. We want to keep things, again, sustainable and regenerative. Is this helping at all? Or at least somewhat? Is it helping at least somewhat? Is it getting clearer at all? A little bit. Okay, well that's good. Yes.
What is the reason, what happened 200 years ago that resources took over this artistry like that?
I don't know. It would be an interesting thing to look at, wouldn't it? Most likely it started with corruption in the field of ideas in the Middle Ages. That's most likely the start. Once you have corruption in the field of ideas, everything becomes degraded, because the field of ideas provides the direction for society and the standards of what's Dharma for everybody. When that field becomes corrupt, when people lose their faith in that field and that field becomes corrupt, although it looks like that field doesn't do much practical for society, then the other fields tend to be also gradually become exploitive. So from a philosophical and historical point of view, that's most likely your answer. I wouldn't stake my life on it, but that's most likely your answer. I mean, that's what's explained in the Bhagavad Purana, that corruption started in the field of ideas. Now, sometimes corruption starts in one of the other fields, but if the field of ideas is healthy, then it can root out that corruption. So if there's corruption in government, the field of ideas can root that out. If there's corruption in resources, the field of government can root that out. But if there's corruption in the field of ideas, the government doesn't often have the power and the vision to act properly. Yes. Well, I'm kind of sort of hoping that this is the solution. That's what I'm sort of kind of hoping. Is it realistic? I hope so. Or else I'm wasting a lot of people's time here. I hope it's realistic. I believe so. You know, we have here in part 3 the systems. What would a society look like? Now we understand that not everybody reading the book is going to be interested in part 3. But what would society look like? Competition within each field. Cooperation between the fields. How the fields have checks and balances of each other. How you have sustainable prosperity. A case study of what we call mathematical eco-sociology, and a vision for a whole society. Now let's just say that everybody here put into effect as much as they could the first 7 principles up here, which are individual. The first 7 principles of career Dharma are individual principles. So let's say we all did that. That has some effect. And the more people that do that, the more effect it has. And then you need somebody who's in the field of government who's going to work on 8 and 9.
In a Western world,
Do you have a microphone? All I heard you say was in a Western world. You think a dead microphone? You have lots of abundant help there, more than you can use.
do you think it's sustainable with the way the West is set up and with a planet with so many people?
What I see in the world is that people in the West are often more open to this. That often people in developing countries are watching TV and movies, and they think that everybody in Western countries lives like some rich people they see in the media. And they're often running away from the parts of their society that could be more like this. Whereas people in the more developed world have already seen that exploitation and corruption and a perpetual idea of growth for the economy is a catastrophe. So I see that there's far more people in what we call Western societies. I mean, I'm wondering, Australia is west of what exactly? But anyway, I guess you're west of the international date line. So, you know, in what we call Western societies are much, much, much more open. This is what I see practically. I mean, you do have, you know, whatever you want to call the rest of the world, where people are open, but it's what my own experience is that they're more in the minority. That in the more developing world, people are like, we just have to find a career that makes us a lot of money. And never mind that plastic is polluting. Just throw it everywhere anyway. So that's what I see more in developing countries, that you're starting to get some interest, but it's lagging behind the West by decades. But I think it's I think this is most possible to have an example in the West. And if it's done in the West, let's say it could be done on a small scale. Let's say that this could be done right here in New Govardhan on a small scale, which I believe it could. I believe this community is complicated enough to do it and simple enough to do it, if that makes any sense. You have all 4 fields operating here. And you're already working on quite a lot of the principles of 8 and 9. So we could make a model of this here. Now, for example, we have, the Hare Krishna movement has in Hungary a farm where they grow a lot of their own food and things like that. And they have tens of thousands of visitors every year to see it. And they have many scientists and researchers coming, but they're not putting all these principles into action there, at least not yet. Although the head of that community is very interested. So imagine if they were putting all these principles into action, how much more they would get in terms of research and tourism. Or we have, our Hare Krishna movement has in India, 2 hours out of Mumbai, a place called Govardhan Eco Village, where again, they're trying to do a lot of number 9. I'd say they're doing a lot of 6 and 7 and 9 and some of 4, but they're not really doing everything. And again, they're getting tons of people coming just to see that. So if they put all this into action in their relatively small community, how many more researchers would come and how many more people would write about it? And eventually it gets out and people say, oh, let's check that out. So I'm looking at this happening, Rukmini and I are looking at this happening on an individual level. That makes a difference too. Please don't think that doesn't make a difference. If someone says, wow, why are you so happy? I love my work. I love what I do. I love what I'm producing. I feel very enriched. Oh, how are you doing that? What's your secret? Even if you just tell a few friends. And how do you know? One of the friends you tell may, go on YouTube and have 1 million followers. And then at some point it needs to be adopted by some model communities. Or somebody in government. Someone in the field of government. Doesn't have to be political government. Do I think this can happen perfectly? No, the world's not perfect. Do I think we can get very close to it? Well, there's a lot of predictions that we will. There are predictions in the sacred writings that there'll be a golden age. And that this will be part of it. And I see that people are hungry for it. I mean, I've been teaching all kinds of things related to spirituality for decades, and I've never found the kind of hunger that I found with teaching this. Not anywhere close. So I'm just seeing that it's a great need, it's a great hunger, people are looking for it, they want it. As people are getting more and more and more confused, they more and more want clarity. So I'm hopeful. I hope I'm not naive, but I am hopeful. And I am seeing that the world is, many parts of the world in many ways are starting to move toward this anyway. They're starting to ask these kinds of questions. Do you all see that? I am seeing some things in the world getting worse and worse and worse. But I'm also seeing that this desire, let's be who we really are. Let's integrate spirituality with our work. Let's not have a religion that's just a religion that's something you do once a day or once a week or 3 times a year. And let's stop having just empty materialistic lives where mostly we're unhappy with a little dots of enjoyment every once in a while. So I'm seeing people are ready for that. what my objectives in teaching this, my bottom line objective, is just for people to say, oh, this makes so much sense. This social and economic description in the scriptures, in the sacred writings of the Vedas, makes a lot of sense. That's my bottom line. Above that is if someone goes, oh, it makes a lot of sense and I can do something about it in my own life. Or some people who've come to me and said, I'm already doing all this, great. And my next tier would be someone who says, hey, I think I can help. I can teach this, I can counsel people, I can try to set up a community. And I am seeing that. But yeah, I mean, I had one person walk out of one of my classes because she says, this is all too idealistic. Personally, I think trying to teach everyone to purely love God is a lot more idealistic than having a good social and economic system. And we're trying to teach people to be purely in love with God. And people are doing it. You know, everywhere I go, I meet people who are actually achieving spiritual perfection that's described in our scripture. But that's a lot more idealistic, I would say. Then you got to get rid of your false ego. But thank you so much. Anybody else? Yes.
Point 8, where you describe the competition within the fields. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's just like there's, you know, competition between athletes. Or, I don't know if you do this here, but in America, every state has an annual state fair. And those state fairs start with county fairs. So again, I don't know exactly what it's like here. But in America, we have our governments, cities, and then counties, and then states. So in the county fair, there's competition who can go the biggest, healthiest pumpkin. And who can bake the nicest cake. And who can do the best embroidery. And then you win at the county level. And then all the winners at the county level, they present their stuff at the state level. And then you go to the state fair, and there's people who win. The best cookies, the best cake, the best, you know, pickled tomatoes. And we always like to take our school kids there, because they usually have people doing traditional crafts and things like that. There's, practically every one of the trades has competitions. I mean, some of them have evolved into game-type things. But, you know, there are plumbing competitions, there are electrical wiring competitions, there certainly is competition in business. Politically, there's competition. You have more than one political party. We're going to serve you this way, no, we're going to serve you that way. We have different types of political systems. I mean, in India, in the different states, there are very different political systems in each state. I mean, even in America, again, I don't know what it's like here between like Queensland and New South Wales. Do you have like that, different political systems? And they may be somewhat different? Do you have people of different political parties ruling different states? You know, and the rules are somewhat different. And if people go, well, you know, I don't like that system, they'll get rid of it and they'll get another system. And there's competition in ideas. I mean, we read about how there used to be debates between philosophers and religionists, right? And those were serious debates. You lost that debate, you had to become the disciple of the person who defeated you. The stakes were very high. And there's always been different sects of a religion. There's always been branches with different teachers. And there's some competition. Oh, we're giving you the most pure thing. Or we're giving you... They're competing for purity. That's a very good thing.
So, in other words, it increases the field of excellence.
It increases the excellence. It encourages everybody. People are encouraged by competition. And competition maintains the quality of excellence in something. Without competition, it's very, very hard to keep maintaining that quality of excellence. then you're saying everyone is going to work for excellence for its own sake. I mean, Srila Prabhupada said competition gives life. But it should be, I mean, we have a whole chapter about competition. It shouldn't be envious competition or malicious competition. You're not trying to destroy your competitor. In fact, having competitors is part of what makes your field healthy. So you want to continue to have competitors. Yes, you thought some more about it.
Urmila Mataji, I have different question.
Oh, different question. Okay.
The 9 principles, 6 or 7 of them can be generalized or summarized into some way of internal nature to be expressed in your livelihood.
Correct.
In what you do.
The first 7 of them can be done by individuals.
And it seems very natural to have that happening and very logical. What force is it that drives people in whole societies to go against
Number 7.
And what do we do about it?
The shades of ego. It's the shades of ego that are pushing in the opposite direction. That's it. Therefore, it's one of the most important principles is to strive to work above the shades of ego. To notice how these different shades affect you in your life. You know, if you can't get above the shades, at least get to a higher one. At least get out of tamas. At least work in rajas. A rajas society is a lot more pleasant than a tamas society. All criminality is at the bottom of tamas. At least in a rajasic society, people would be working hard and be reasonably honorable and responsible, although they might not be particularly pleasant or happy. And ideally, you can have above the shades. If you can't do that, aim for a rajasic or push for a sattvic society. Sattvic society, people are actually happy. The only place you're going to find material happiness is in sattva. In rajas, you're going to find some material pleasure here and there, but not really happiness. And in tamas, you find neither pleasure nor happiness. If we could get modern society to come to rajas, that would be a big improvement. But we really want to try to work above the shades of ego. Is that easy? No. Is it possible? Yes. Daivi esha gunamayi mama maya durachaya. Mam evaye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. I've had people telling me, you can't expect people to work above the shades of ego. I said, well, Krishna expects it. Nistrigunya bhav Arjuna. Get above the shades of ego, Arjuna. Do your duty above the shades. And that's not, well, that's for Arjuna. No, it's for everybody. That's the problem. Yes. Maybe get a mic.
If I can't tell exactly where I fit in with the 4 types,
Yes.
Does your book help with that?
If you can tell, then...
If I cannot tell...
If you can't tell...
No, yeah.
Not yet, then maybe we could have a little talk.
Is there a quiz or something in the book?
There is in Appendix B. Yes,
Okay.
but I'm also happy to meet with anybody. Sometimes it's a matter of 5 minutes. And you look fairly young, so it's probably going to be short. The older people are, often the longer it takes. Not always, but often. I mean, the kind of questions you can ask yourself, and we talk about this in Appendix B, what do I want to dedicate myself to all day, every day? how do I want to serve society? Not just what do I care about. I mean, I care about sustainable regenerative wealth, but I don't want to do it. What do I want to actually do? Where am I in flow? And be careful, because we can all go into a state of flow for recreation. Yeah? Someone will say, well, I can just go into a state of flow playing computer games or playing soccer. And you say, well, you're not going to play computer games as your contribution to society. And do you want to be a professional athlete and contribute to the beauty of society and the pleasure of society that way? And somebody will say yes or no. Those are the kind of questions I ask people. Like if someone comes to me and says, well, I'm not sure if I'm in resources or government, I'll say, why do you think you're in resources? Why do you think you're in government? What are you willing to work for? What are you willing to sacrifice for? What do you not want to outsource? What do you really want to do yourself? What kind of things do you just do without being asked, without being paid, that might even annoy people? Do you have some way of being or acting that keeps manifesting itself over and over again, no matter what you're doing? Those are the kind of questions to look at. And it can help if someone else asks you those questions rather than you're just introspecting. I mean, a lot of times people can get it just by introspection. Sometimes it helps by having another person ask them. You know, like this one person who was 48, and, you know, he said, well, I knew him when he was an investment banker, so I said, well, you're working in resources. He says, no, I hate resources. He said, but I can't figure out if I'm government or ideas. And that took 2.5 hours, actually, because he had done work for the past maybe 15 years in both fields. And he says, well, you know, I said, could you work for, you know, justice, do negotiation, diplomacy, ethics, following the law? Could you do that 8 hours a day? He's like, oh, definitely. I'm like, well, could you do the visioning and the research and the curriculum planning? Could you do that 8 or 10 hours a day? He said, oh, definitely. And I was kind of stuck. I'm like, where do I go from here? And then I said, oh, which one are you willing to outsource? I said, suppose that you did all the negotiation and the diplomacy and making sure that all the project was in compliance with the law, making sure that all the facility was provided, and you outsourced the research and the curriculum planning and the visioning. Would you be okay with that? And he said, no way. I said, all right, suppose you did the visioning and the curriculum planning and, you know, the syllabus and the research, and you were outsourcing the diplomacy and the negotiation and the legal compliance. Would you be okay? He said, definitely. I'm like, okay, fine. You know, I had someone who wasn't sure about a couple of fields, and it was just like, are you energized by crisis? And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, well, there you go. I think they were looking at government and resources. So it sometimes it takes me a while to get to what is the right question for them. Does that make some sense? Yeah? So you can try looking at that kind of thing yourself also. But yeah, we have Appendix B that gives you guidelines for doing that. I'm also happy, as time permits, if somebody feels they want to talk to me in addition to what they're reading. Yes? What kind of microphone should we use? At least if the microphone breaks,
I
it's not...
have a projection voice.
All right. Okay.
What's kind of the first step once you identify your field and say you're working in another one? Like, it's scary just to quit your job.
We have a whole... It is, and I don't suggest you just jump off a cliff. We do have a whole section in the book about this when we talk about being in the wrong field. We also talk about how to get in the right place if you're in the wrong place, especially if you already have all kinds of obligations. if you already have a partner and you already have kids and you already have a mortgage or rent, just quitting is not a very good idea. Some of the best advice that my husband was ever given, he tried to start his own business 3 times and failed. And then one of his friends said to him, look, just stay at your job, get a good job, stay at the job, start your business on the side. Once the business takes off, quit your job. And that's what he did. I mean, it was a point, there was about a week when he was working 8 hours at his job and 8 hours at his business. And then he's like, okay, I can quit the job. So there's ways to transition intelligently. Like that little inchworm that's searching for the spot. You've seen those creatures, No? Do they have them here? They're like in between, they have no legs, and on either end they have 4 legs. Do you have those little things here? And so the top part is leaning out over the branch and looking. And then when it finds a branch, then it lets go of the backside. For many people, you can transition and keep a lot of the information and skills that you already have. Because there's often all 4 fields are involved in work that uses similar information and skills. Like, say, in medicine. There's work in medicine you can do in each of the 4 fields. So sometimes you can keep a lot of that information and skills. Now, if you find you have to have entirely different information and skills, then it's going to be a bigger jump. Like, I was talking to someone who's been a house painter his whole life, and he realized that what he really should do is be in urban planning. That was one of the most interesting discussions that I had, where he said his whole life he was just told, you're an artist, you're an artist, you're an artist, you're an artist. And he said, I am not an artist. I hate it when people call me an artist. I'm like, okay, I hear you. He was like exploding practically. I said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to work in the field of government. He said, I look at communities, I see that buildings are falling apart, or they're not put in the right places, and people are not getting the infrastructure and facility they need. It drives me crazy. And I'm always just trying to see how I can fix it. But instead, I'm just painting houses. It was really fascinating. And I said, sounds like you want to be in urban planning. He said, definitely. He never even thought of it before. He's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And then I said, well, government also takes care of, like, wilderness areas. And he went, I said, you don't like that idea, do you? And he's like, no. And then he said, well, what would I need to do? And I said, well, there's another member of the community here that works in urban planning. Why don't you ask her? What's involved. And I said, again, he has a wife and 2 little kids. I said, it's not that you're just going to quit your job tomorrow, but you could probably start working on it and start getting into that work. So my point is that sometimes it is something that's radically different. Which was why we should try for our children and teenagers to try to teach us when they're young. So you don't end up, he's like 38. So you don't end up at 38 saying, oh my God, I've been miserable in my work my whole life. He said, is it too late? I'm like, how old are you? 38. I said, no, it's not too late. Go ahead and do it. I said, if you're 70, it's too late. Forget it. But we do have a whole section on that. We have we describe a lot of the details, and we also have links to a number of outside resources, websites, and other books that can help with making that kind of a transition. Yes.
Hi. Before I ask this question, can you confirm that you are in the field of ideas?
Yes.
Okay. So I can see that you're very generous with your time. You're very willing to have these conversations and help people connect to
up to a point. I do need to sleep.
Of course, yes. So I'm curious, with that being said, does this always energize you?
Yes.
Getting this
incredibly
truth out
so.
of them, and you never feel drained?
Not if
by
I'm doing
it
my own
itself.
work, no.
And so with that being said, if you were to
I
feel
do
drained,
notice that I'm tired when I stop.
right?
So I'll stop and go, oh, I got to go to bed.
And you mentioned that about ideas, people needing to be looked after because they often
Yeah,
maybe
that's
with the
also true.
stimulation.
But I think in general, I mean, this happened to my granddaughter who's in artistry. So she saw, I was given a desk as a gift, but it was, how do you put this politely? It was one of those just pressed wood and glue thingies, you know?
Yeah.
It
Flat
probably not even that good. And it had just like, you know, a thin plastic veneer that looked sort of kind of like wood. I mean, I was very grateful that someone gave me that as a gift, and I had a reasonably functional desk for a while. But it at all the stress points, it started stressing. Yeah, it was a distressed desk. And so my granddaughter said, Grandma, I'd really like to make you a desk. And I'm like, great. So she went and got all this, you know, real wood. She got all the real wood for free, by the way. You know, she found abandoned wood that was all in perfect shape, and she matched the type and the grain of the wood. And she got into it so much that she was working so many hours that she, like, stressed out some of the muscles in her thumb, and then she couldn't work for a week. She had to rest it. So that happens anywhere, where you get so absorbed, your work is so energizing for you that you can forget to cherish your sources of wealth, first being your body and mind, and actually take care of yourself. So that's true in any field where you're really energized by what you're doing.
So to feel drained is not necessarily an indication that it is not your field. It's more of finding the balance in.
Well, I mean, we all have physiological needs, emotional needs, mental, intellectual needs, and spiritual needs. We do need to have a balanced life. And then there are always going to be some parts of your work that you don't like. There's definitely some parts of my work that I wish I could outsource, but I don't know how to do that without training somebody so extensively. And I haven't figured out how to do it. But there are definitely some parts of my work that I do not like to do. Like, I really appreciate it when people help me sell the books. I can do it well, but I don't particularly enjoy it. So there are certain things I'm happy to have people outsource. I'm happy to outsource them. I give the example, like, you know, I love being a mother and raising children, but if my kid vomited in my bed at 2 a.m, I could have outsourced that part. Hey, come clean it up. You know, that would have been great. So there are certain parts of any work that you just don't like. I mean, that's just life. And all of us have to do some things to live. You know, and everyone's got to bathe and get clean clothes. And I mean, the old royalty used to have someone bathe them. But, you know, generally there's certain things that everybody just has to do. But the main part of the work we're doing should energize us, regardless of what field we're in. And yes, it can energize us so much that we forget to cherish our field. We forget to cherish our sources of prosperity because we're so absorbed in it. That can happen. And, you know, I've learned to say to people, hey, I have a physical body. I'm sorry I have to sleep now. Or I'm sorry I have to eat now. You know, sorry, just got a physical body. It has to be maintained. You know, I have to go for a walk. I mean, I was sitting outside at the ladies' ashram the other day, and someone came to talk to me. I said, can you just pretend that there's an invisibility shield around me right now? So,
Thank you. That makes perfect
is
sense.
that all right?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. And tomorrow we will be reviewing all 9 principles, again starting at 4 o'clock. Tomorrow morning, we're going to be doing Krishna meditations. So those of you who want to find the divine in the rain and in the trees and in the birds and in your breath and in your walking, even in creation and dissolution of chairs. So you can please come
tomorrow morning at 7:30.
And also, if I could remind the ladies, Urmila's giving the ladies an exclusive session on Sunday at 4 p.m. at the Goshala. There's a beautiful conference room above the Goshala. Please, all the ladies, make sure you attend, 4 p.m. And if you want to know what Urmila is going to talk about, have a look at the poster outside there. It gives a little summary. Thank you so much, Urmila.